I'm J.R. Jamison. Today on the Facing Project, I'll be headed to London to sit down with author and editor Fiona Robertson, whose latest memoir of grief, hope, and love explores Britain's standing stones and the solace of their offerings in times of darkness. And we'll discuss lessons learned from these megaliths on endurance, survival, joy, and the luminous reminder of what it means to exist on this earth. In the wake of her late husband's cancer diagnosis, Fiona reconnected with ancient standing stones to make sense of her newfound reality and understanding that human existence is characterized by impermanence. And what she also found were streams of people flowing instinctively to their centers, enchanted by their very magic. Stonelands is a book about grief and strength and finding light in the dark, but it's also a book about the history of standing stones throughout Britain and their powers to heal and bring people together. Which invites the question, do these sites indeed have natural healing qualities that can help us through our hardest days? Stay with us. You're listening to The Facing Project, and I'm J.R. Jamison. My guest today is author and editor Fiona Robertson, whose memoir, Stonelands, A Journey of Darkness and Light Through Britain's Ancient Places, explores grief, hope, and love through standing stones and the solace of their offerings in times of darkness, and lessons learned on endurance, survival, joy, and the luminous reminder of what it means to exist on this earth. Fiona, thank you so much for joining me on the Facing Project.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Stonelands is a book about grief and strength and finding light in the dark, but it's also a book about the history of standing stones and megaliths throughout Britain and their powers to heal and bring people together. I found it to be an interesting and powerful approach. Talk more about the decision to go on this journey and connect the two.
Well, I'd been fascinated by Britain's standing stones for a long time. It's something that I explored in my personal life as a kind of megalith hunter, and then also in my professional life as a commissioning editor and publisher at a small indie book publishing company called Watkins. So my husband Stephen and I had been visiting ancient sites pretty much since we met. And once the kids appeared in our life, we took them along too. And then when Stephen was diagnosed with cancer, I needed to do something to distract myself from the grief and the horror. And I thought that immersing myself in writing might be one way of kind of not thinking about what was going on. And I found that what I wanted to write about was standing stones. So the thing about standing stones is that they seem to offer us a really helpful metaphor of endurance and survival. I had this image in my head of a standing stone on a moor, battered by countless storms, yet somehow still upright after 4,000 or 5,000 years. And this image seemed to say something to me about human endurance, patience, and strength, and about the transience of our individual lives, and about the things that last. And the Stonelands grew from this idea that standing stones can be associated with certain qualities or themes. So do you want me to tell you a little bit give you some examples from the book maybe?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So, the first chapter is about Avebury, and it's a site in Wiltshire. It's one of the first places that I went to. It's where I fell in love with standing stones. It's so amazing. It's this village surrounded by a stone circle with an avenue of stones and these a huge mound, and just kind of crazy place, really. Anyway, Avebury has been invented several times over its 5 millennia long history. So although it seems now to be somewhere that is very much like an ancient, unchanging place, it actually is very much somewhere that has changed again and again. And when Stephen got sick, I had this, I just felt like my whole world had been turned upside down, and what had been solid was now in flux. So the theme of Avebury is everything changes. And then another example is Callanish and the Isle of Lewis, where there's a huge array of monuments there made of Lewisian gneiss, which is Britain's very oldest rock. This is incredibly old, beautiful, silvery rock, millions of years old. And I associated these monuments with endurance and strength. So overall, the idea was that by investigating certain megalithically rich areas or sites, the stonelands of the title, I could explore what it is about standing stones that appeals to me and so many others today.
And for our American listeners, where our show is broadcast here in the United States, in case people haven't caught on, standing stones, probably the most famous that I think most Americans would know is
Yes.
Stonehenge, although
Of course.
there are many different sites across the UK. Stonehenge is just probably the most famous, I think, for most Americans.
Yeah, I mean, Stonehenge is the most kind of grand and impressive site, probably. But there are around 1,000, maybe around 700 stone circles in Britain and Ireland, and I think 1,000 if you include Brittany over in northern France, and then untold thousands of individual standing stones dotting the fields and moors and roadsides of Britain. So being a megalith enthusiast is a kind of very rich pursuit because you're never going to run out of material.
Yeah. And there are likely still sites not found.
Yeah, definitely. Or stones that have been lost. So to go back to the example of Avebury, during history, over the centuries, the stones there, some of them have been buried. Many of them were broken up and used as building material, but lots of them were buried. And then when Avebury was restored in the 1930s, the restorer Alexander Keeler, known as the Marmalade King because he had a personal fortune that derived from marmalade, he restored 2 sectors of the henge, which is the kind of central, the stone circle bounded by a ditch and a bank in Avebury. But the two other sectors are completely unrestored. So maybe one day a new Marmalade King will come along and excavate those 2.
Yeah. Connecting your love for megaliths and standing stones and connecting it to this grieving process that you were going through with the diagnosis of your husband's cancer and eventually the loss of your husband. On grieving, you write in the book, the light has grown as the year turns from winter to spring, but the darkness is still there shadowing everything. Quoting C.S. Lewis, you say, "No one ever told me that grief felt so like fear." In some ways, even though standing stones had meant so much to you throughout your life, you were dreading going back to the ones you had visited with Stephen. But once you did, you came to life again after seeing the streams of people flowing instinctively to their centers and enchanted by their magic. You go on to write, "There's something profound going on for me now. I'm feeling a deep sense of gratitude to this place for being just as enchanting and awe-inspiring as when we first encountered it all those years ago, making me understand that Stephen's being is now part of the fabric of the universe, and so a part of these mountains, a part of these birds that are scattering over the stones, an aspect of the stones themselves, and of anything that stirs my soul. Nothing is born or dies, but there is a mixture of separation of things that are." Talk more about this moment. What have the standing stones taught you about accepting life and death?
So in that last passage you mentioned, you're referring to a return trip to Castlerigg Stone Circle that I made with the kids the spring after Stephen died. And that's a really beautiful stone circle in Cumbria, in the north of England, in the Lake District. And there were 2 things that really struck me about my re-encounter with Castlerigg. So the first was that the memory of going there for the first time with Stephen about 20 years earlier was just as real to me as my in-the-moment experience of returning there without him. And it helped me to understand that death isn't the end of a relationship. You lose the present day interaction with the person, but everything you had together in the past still remains, and it's safe there in your memory. And somehow standing stones are emblematic of that. Perhaps they were raised to honour individuals to ensure that their memory wouldn't fade. We just don't know. But whatever they once meant, they're still with us, so many thousand years after the people who built them died. And their solidity and long-lastingness stand in contrast to the ephemeral nature of our human lives. We have a moment of individuality and then our bodies disperse back into nature, and who knows what happens to our souls. And then the other thing that struck me about this trip back to Castlereagh and really pleased me was that the incredible beauty of this place. These stones are standing on a kind of shelf, entirely surrounded by peaks and fells, affected me just as intensely as it had done the first time 2 decades before. It's really sad to think that these wow moments when you get older are all in the past. But with stone circles, and that's one of the things I love about them. I don't find that because they're such atmospheric and powerful places, and my enjoyment of them never seems to fade. And each time I go back, I'm kind of struck again by how amazing they are.
Can you talk a bit about this kind of thin veil of the spiritual world and our present world while at Standing Stones? You write in your book about how people leave trinkets for loved ones who have passed. There are even cremains left at some of the Standing Stones. The power that they put off when you're in their presence clearly creates a connection to Mother Earth and likely beyond. Can you talk more about them being a place of memorial for people?
Well, so there's a stone, there's a long barrow called Cauldron Long Barrow, which is about 40 minutes drive away from me. And it's just amazing this place has survived because it's one of the very oldest sites in Britain. And human remains were found there dating back 6,000 years. Which is just incredible, really. And then going to that place, people do leave. They put kind of wishing ribbons and they hang offerings in the branches of the trees. And I found a notice from a crematorium notice of dispersal of ashes there, and that really sort of struck me, that kind of continuity of use in a different way. And I think people, it is somewhere that people scatter ashes, and it's certainly people are drawn there to leave all sorts of things. Like I've seen kind of crystals, shells, fruit of seasonal fruit, seasonal flowers. I think now the tendency is to discourage people to leave things that aren't biodegradable because not everyone wants to see a kind of bunch of stuff when they go to a stone site. And actually, if you wedge coins in the holes in the stones, as some people do, then it's going to gradually wear the rock away. But no one has said, "Oh, it's not like an altar in a Christian church where the use has been defined through the centuries." Stone circles are different. No one has ever written down, you should go and do this, and you must be of this faith to do this, and only these kinds of people can come here. So that's one of the wonderful things about them, really. And something I find really exciting is it kind of offering a new and inclusive way of being spiritual, where you can go to a stone circle and kind of, as long as you don't damage the stones, you can do what you want, really. I mean, if you want to run naked through the stones, which I don't, but people do, or if you want to go and meditate there, or if you want to go with friends and have a ritual of your own devising, people do, and no one minds. So it's definitely a focus of modern spirituality.
I know myself, I connect kind of to the spiritual realm in my own, I guess if you want to call it spirituality, by being out in nature. And I guess I'm a bit of a tree hugger here in the US, right? Because there is this energy when you touch trees that you can feel.
Yeah.
And you talk about this with Standing Stones as well. Whether you believe in the power of them or not, when you touch a standing stone, there is an energy that is transferred, that is put off. And for you, you talk about how this creates a sense of calm. And I find this for myself when I'm out in nature as well, and I'm taking in its beauty and touching trees or doing what I do here. Talking about this, you write that even still, sometimes when your brain is wearying, you imagine that you're a standing stone, standing in a spot battered by the storms and warmed by the sun. All stone me needs is to just be. You go on to share that one of the central doctrines of Buddhism is that our human existence is characterized by impermanence. Our realities are simply constructs of our incredibly powerful minds. How do standing stones or even connection to Earth itself remind us to just be in the moment?
Well, so standing stones are, for me, they do feel alive. I'm, by the way, I'm also I'm a stone hugger and a tree hugger.
I'm so
And I
happy to
think
be among good company.
they, they are comparable because they're both rooted in the earth. So there's that sense of groundedness. And a standing stone is also rooted in time. Some trees are rooted in time as well. Obviously, some are incredibly old. And with both trees and stones, with a large old tree and a big old megalith, you have the sense of them having have been in place through the centuries and even millennia as the world changed around them, and they just stayed there, kind of constant, a pole star in the turning universe. And so all of these things I find deeply calming and relaxing.
Mm-hmm. How can that motivate one to action versus making them feel insignificant? So I'm thinking about, I love this idea of imagining being a standing stone or even an old tree grounded to the earth and the calming effect that has. But I also know people who don't take moments of calm. And when they try to meditate, I'm a meditator as well. And when I've talked to friends about meditating, I have some friends who say, oh, I could not sit for that long to meditate. So thinking about this idea of stillness and what standing stones and also trees can teach us about being still, how can that idea motivate one to action versus feeling, I guess, insignificant in the grand universe?
Well, I guess from the perspective of a standing stone, we're all insignificant, aren't we? So, feelings. So you can feel insignificant because you can feel small in the great scale of things, or you can feel insignificant maybe comes more when you compare yourself to other people. That paralyzing sense that someone else has got, 30,000 more followers than you have, or someone else's book is selling so much better than your own book, So actually, I think a standing stone can be quite helpful in that regard because from a perspective of a standing stone, our lives are just the tiniest flashes. It doesn't really matter. The relative success is kind of irrelevant, really. And for me, I find that acting is a solution for feeling insignificant or other negative feelings. And whenever I feel terribly glum about something, I just focus in on what I'm doing, and I feel like that's the way of not feeling insignificant, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Just forgetting about other people and concentrating on the work at hand.
Yeah. I like this idea too, thinking about the ancient stones, but even ancient trees, this idea of connection to the past. And this idea, if going off of what you're saying about when people may feel insignificant, but finding ways to find kind of significance, right, in your life, I think part of it too could be looking at how long these stones have been here on Earth and all the people who have cared for them over time. And part of our significance may be caring for what's already here on Earth for the next generation.
Yes, totally. And being a kind of guardian I mean, the thing is, it's possible to become overwhelmed with what you face around you. And a really great example of this, actually, is William Stukeley, who's an 18th century antiquarian. And I was reading his from one of his manuscripts only this morning, not the real manuscript, obviously, an online version of it. And so William Stukeley went to Avebury in the 1720s, and at that time, many of the stones were still standing, but many of them had fallen, and others had recently been dragged away because there'd been a bit of an expansion of the village in that era or just before. So people were actively dragging the stones away, breaking them up, using them for building. And William Stukeley was absolutely outraged by this and really, really upset. He just couldn't understand this incredible ancient temple, as he called it. The stupendous fabric of this ancient temple was being ripped apart. And he names some of the people who were responsible for doing this. And Tom Robinson is the worst offender. And so and he write, and there's a bit that struck me only this morning, actually, where he says something like, he did his best. He's recorded everything that he could see. He also recorded the positions of the stones that had gone using oral testimony and the stone holes, because he wanted to create a record that someday people who, when the discipline had advanced more and the scholarship had deepened, that people would be able to do something with his work. And that's exactly what happened. So he recorded Beckhampton Avenue, which for centuries archaeologists didn't believe existed. And then at the turn of the 20th century, it was discovered that it had existed. So, and then I think Alexander Keeler, when he was restoring Avebury, will have looked back at Stukeley and other early antiquarian records. So he also encouraged some of these people that were knocking down the stones to stop doing it. So he did have even though it was, for his perspective, and actually mine too, when I look back at tragedy, how much of Avebury was lost, he did play a role in protecting it. And he was like a kind of stepping stone for later generations to protect the site more and do more work, and for our knowledge of what it was today. So he's a great example, really.
Mm-hmm. Going back to this idea of our lives being kind of social constructs in many ways. You write about, after your husband Stephen's cancer diagnosis, you're moving through the stages of self-motivation to try to get on with regular day-to-day activities of life, which also feel like deep dread. You share that the stories we tell ourselves, focusing on love instead of fear, hope instead of despair, finding moments of happiness, allow us to accept our reality as an illusion, and still there's joy in its wondrous detail. Talk more about these effects of storytelling and the power of positive thinking.
So really, Stephen's diagnosis had such a profound effect on me. It was like my comfortable, stable world that I thought would go on forever had exploded, and I could suddenly see the mechanisms behind it all. It almost felt like an enlightenment. And one of the things I understood was that things do change, that death is real. It really is going to happen to him and to me and to everyone. And then another thing I understood was how my mind would make and remake the world depending on, whether he'd got some hopeful news from the doctor, or I'd read something in the newspapers about a miracle new cancer cure, or whether the news was less good. And previously, I'd always felt so sort of sorry for those families who were facing a terminal diagnosis, and thought that it would be impossible to function under those circumstances. But then it happened to my own family, and I realised that you get through it because you have to get through it. And actually, if you just focus on small positive steps to take with hope, you can move forward. And even if you don't know where you're going, it's still possible to function.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing I realized was that I'd wasted so much of my previous life when I hadn't been living under the shadow of cancer, worrying about things that really didn't matter, arguing over trivialities. And now that he'd fallen sick, all that mattered was the fact that I loved him, and he loved us, and trying to get through this dreadful situation. And there's really nothing like an incurable cancer diagnosis to focus the mind on what matters.
Hmm. What would you say to people who are critics of positive thinking or the power of positive thinking? I mean, you're on the other side of this now, right?
Yeah.
But there are some individuals who criticize this idea of the power of positive thinking. What would you say to them?
Well, I totally agree that positive thinking can be toxic, especially when it's being imposed on you by other people. Um, but the thing is that I'm personally rather prone to having dark thoughts. So I find it helpful to deliberately turn away from the negative ones. And I don't know if this is psychologically healthy or not, and perhaps it isn't. But since Stephen was diagnosed, I've just become very conscious that life is short and precious and can be taken away at any moment. And I don't know how many healthy years remain to me. I mean, no one can know that. But however, however long I have left, I want to make the most of it.
Hmm. I think that's a really beautiful way to look at it all. And I have to say, after I read your book, I started thinking about my own mortality a bit, and this right. And I feel like COVID also taught us a lot about mortality in those
Yeah.
years, and being at home and the life change happening there, all of these things swirling around. But after I read your book, I started thinking about my own mortality in a way and thinking about, yeah, why is there any reason to get so upset about the trivial things in life? Doesn't it make more sense to be in the moment, like a standing stone?
Yes. I mean, obviously, you can't control how your emotions and I wouldn't ask anyone to do that. It would be weird not to sort of feel the feelings. But on the other hand, things that used to really piss me off, um, things that really used to bother me, I just don't I don't care about that stuff so much now. I don't
Hmm.
sweat the small stuff so much. Um, I let things go much more easily.
Hmm. You talked a minute ago about hope, and you have a chapter in the book that's actually entitled The Courage to Hope. And there were so many great, insightful passages you've penned. To read a couple of my favorite, you say, "There is a last time for everything, that when that happens, we rarely know it for what it is. And so we should approach each thing as if we'll never have a chance to experience it again. Remembering always that happiness is one of those things that's clearest seen when looking back." And in another scene, I'm paraphrasing here, you write, "It's the taking away of hope that makes you understand how much we need it to function. After Stephen's diagnosis, I came to realize that courage can simply mean hoping. But as it turns out, it is possible to live with a terminal diagnosis and even go forward with hope by focusing on taking small steps toward achievable, positive outcomes." What have the standing stones and navigating grief after Stephen's death taught you about hope?
Well, this insight that courage above all means hope was a really powerful one for me. Because previously, I used to consciously try to protect myself by assuming that the worst would happen, that, I wouldn't get the promotion, that something plan was going to fall through. And this was all to protect myself from disappointment. But that when I saw that actually Stephen himself was hoping and and he was the one that he was the one that above all had to be brave. So how could I not be brave when he was being brave? It kind of taught me a lesson, really. So since then, I've the value of hope has been highlighted for me.
Mm. For a while, you saw a bereavement therapist who, without knowledge of your interest in stones, asked you to hold a stone when you talked to her. You say, somehow it was helpful to hold the stone that had endured on this planet for thousands of years longer than any human, which the action of the waves over the millennia and the clinking against its fellow pebbles had smoothed into a perfect oval. What can stones teach us about grief and grieving?
Well, that's a really interesting question about our relationship with stone. So, obviously, there's the megaliths, but then there's the stones that people are drawn to pick up on beaches and carry with them. And then there's also, there's a lot of people who believe that different types of stone have different qualities, and they interact with crystals in different ways. And they very sincerely do believe this. And I actually think that stone, the relationship between stone and humans is a really, really ancient one. People have been drawn to interact with stones for a really long time. And so there's a longevity of them, but then there's the question about, what is it? Why is it comforting to hold a stone? I don't know really. I mean, there's something about a sea-worn pebble that's had its rough edges smoothed off that acts as a metaphor for the impact of life on us. Kind of, when we're young, we tend to be sort of fiery and passionate and difficult. And maybe as we get older, that's not the case for all people, obviously. I know a few difficult older people.
So do I.
Maybe I am one myself. But no, I think we tend to become more compassionate and empathetic as life wears off our edges. So there's something in that too. But yes, I need to explore more about stones.
Mm-hmm. I think about in different cultures or spiritual practices. I'm thinking, for instance, in Judaism, it's very common to place stones on grave sites. I've traveled to Cyprus a few different times to visit a friend who lives there. And when we visit her mother's grave, we go to the beach first and collect stones and put them on her mother's grave. So there is something about this connection, right, to stones and their permanence here. As you were saying, kind of the smoothing of the rough edges that show us that as life goes on, we smooth. But they also, in some ways, right, can show us that connection back to the spiritual world and those who have passed on. There's something about stones too that connect us, right, with grief and grieving, but also to those at their actual grave sites.
Yeah.
And I don't know a ton about that. I've not done a lot of research around that, but just seeing it in practical application in my travels and how other cultures are connected to stones and connecting them to death, I find really fascinating.
Me too. I know that early Christian sites were often, people often used to bring pebbles, water-worn pebbles to the early Christian sites. And recently I was in Ireland and I happened to pass through a cemetery. It's a sort of thick place that I like wandering around. And I noticed that many of the graves had white pebbles on them today. So it's definitely an old and ongoing tradition.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing I'd quickly like to say there's something about holding a heavy stone in your hand is almost like, it feels sometimes like holding our own heavy heart. There's something really comforting about it when you feel that stone in your own chest, and then you hold a stone in your hand, and there's something comforting about that too.
I want to shift a bit and take our listeners to actual standing stone sites. It's been suggested by archaeologists that the building of standing stone sites and not the finished product is what mattered the most to ancient humans, and that the creation was a way to bind different communities together. Tell me more about this.
So this is particularly in reference to some of the northern stone circles, so in particular the Ring of Brodgar up in Orkney. So this is a really wonderful Neolithic stone circle that is composed of many different types of rock. So the theory is that different groups would have brought stone from their own quarry to this site, and that maybe the raising of the stones was a way of binding a wider society together. Some of these stone circles don't seem to have been put up with the aim of keeping the stones upright forever and ever in mind. So, like the stones of Stennis, which is near the Ring of Brodgar, the stones are much more firmly fixed in the ground. But the Ring of Brodgar stones, many of them have fallen. So it seems like it was more about building it, taking the stones to the site and putting it up, than actually creating a stone circle that was going to last in its finished form forever. So perhaps that circle was built over a really long period. Stones were put up and they fell, and then more stones were brought and put up and fell, and so it went on.
When you started writing the book, you posted on social media asking about people's unusual experiences at standing stone sites, and you received hundreds of responses about healing, fertility, energy, and wish granting. And later you write that standing stones are often interpreted by archaeologists in terms of community. Your Stonelands Instagram page has grown to over 20,000 followers, and you post regularly images and videos of standing stone sites. How do followers interact and or respond with these posts now? Is it possible to gain the magic of the stones through an image and online community versus being in person at the actual stone sites?
Well, there's no substitute for actually going to the site yourself and touching the stones. But having said that, I love seeing other people's images online. And there are quite a few sites I've never been to myself that I feel I know quite well, having seen them over and over again on Instagram. The Rudston Monolith in Yorkshire is one example. And this is an amazing stone. It's Britain's largest standing stone, almost 8 meters tall. And it stands in a graveyard next to a church. It just looks so weird, and I'm dying to see it in real life. But the Stones community is great. I love being part of it. And the support for my book from the online Stones people has been amazing. So many people posting about the book and also contacting me privately to say that it expressed something of their own love of stones. Megalith enthusiasts are a passionate bunch. We really do love our standing stones. And the most moving thing is when people contact me to say they've experienced bereavement themselves, or even are living with a cancer diagnosis. And I find it incredibly humbling and poignant to know that my story has moved people, and perhaps that sharing it has been in some way helpful to them. And Stephen himself would have been really touched to know this.
I follow you on Instagram, and I've enjoyed seeing the posts about the various stone sites. Prior to following your page, I followed the Stonehenge page, where Stonehenge posts daily sunrise photos at the site. And not having been to a standing stone site myself, I really hope to get to a standing stone site one day. But not having been to one, I do get the sense when I look at the photos of calm, of reflection. So I think there is something with the photos that can interact with our own energy. But I agree with you. It's likely very different when you're actually in person, which I hope to do someday. But I think sites like yours and like the Stonehenge site that I just mentioned can help bring people to these sites with a place of curiosity and also a place of reflection via the internet.
Yes, it's one of the joys of the internet, actually. I mean, it's just amazing. And I've made friends through the internet, which is, well, through my social media, which is great. So yeah, you can't be that, really.
Talk a little bit about the mapping site connected to this online community, right? And I don't have the actual name of the mapping site in front of me, but it's a way for people to find standing stone sites across Britain.
So the megalithic portal. So I got to know the megalithic portal when I commissioned a book called The Old Stones while I was still working at Watkins. And the thing that I love, the Old Stones is a really great resource for Britain and Ireland. But the megalithic portal iPhone app actually covers the whole world. So it's called Pocket Guide Megalith. and then you see yourself, you zoom into where you are, and there you are, a blue dot, and you can see what ancient sites are in your vicinity. And if you're somewhere like Wiltshire in England, then you've got so many ancient sites. And then I don't know if you're somewhere else. I don't know, but you might be surprised actually. I mean, there's people interested in megaliths all over the world, and they really do interact with this site. So yeah, I urge the listeners to try it.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying it as well, especially knowing it's worldwide to see what it
Yeah.
tracks and maps here in the United States.
So what you'll probably find, because the main audience is in the UK, that the coverage in the US will be a bit patchy, but definitely log your local sites, because that's what the megalithic portal want. They want, they want everyone around the world to be feeding into it.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to this idea of storytelling, and with that focus on storytelling and community, you make a distinction between written history and storytelling, writing that history is written down by the rich, but working classes keep history alive through folk art, rituals, song, and storytelling, and that people are becoming reinterested in these things because they offer a sincere and inclusive way of connecting to nature, to the stones, and to each other. It's true that there's been a rise. The Mental Health Foundation in the UK reported that since COVID, nearly half, or 45% of the people living in the UK have indicated that being in nature has helped them cope with the stresses of life. And Penn State has reported a 20% increase in Americans returning to nature post-COVID. What does that say about our current moment in time?
So there's two things to say that I would say about our current moment. The first is that there's definitely a revival of interest in standing stones at the minute, certainly in the UK, and maybe in the US as well. Comparable to what was going on, let's say, in an era like the 60s. And I think that when there's a feeling of threat, people tend to reconnect with a deep time perspective, perhaps as a distraction, perhaps to reassure themselves that the cycles of life will go on. And certainly, right in the minute, it feels like a time of kind of division and struggle, and so the stones resonate more. The other thing is, we're now living through climate crisis, a time of threat to the earth. So people are increasingly concerned with reconnecting with nature. I guess we're appreciating more and more something that's in danger of being taken away from us. So I think that's why observing the pagan Wheel of the Year festivals is becoming such a big thing. And I mean, I don't know. I think it's in the US as well. Certainly in the UK. The Wheel of the Year has these 8 seasons, and there's a festival for each one.
Mm-hmm.
And so these times, summer solstice, winter solstice, Samhain, Beltane, and so on, are times when people tend to gather at their local ancient site and observe things like, Stonehenge famously is aligned with summer solstice sunrise and winter solstice sunset. And they're tapping into things that people observed in a time that was much simpler, less complicated. Well, we don't know if it was less full of threat, but I don't think in that era, that really ancient era, people were envisaging the world ending in the same way as we are now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they were, who knows? But there's a definite drive for reconnecting with nature, and stone circles really allow you to do that. I mean, the very form of a stone circle is the form of the sun, and it's the form of the turning wheel. So,
Mm-hmm.
in the same way as the sun goes on its yearly journey, and at the end of it comes back to the beginning, so you can walk around a stone circle. So all these things really resonate.
Mm-hmm. Throughout history, too, there's been a sense of care for these sacred places that has been passed down. With standing stones and even the Uffington White Horse, we see generations after generations caring for these sacred places over thousands of years. What does that, and you mentioned empathy a second ago, what does that help us understand about empathy?
Well, I mean, it's amazing that the White Horse survived. even through sort of eras that were not known for being particularly empathetic. Um, and I'm not really sure how that happened, to be honest. But because with a stone, if you put it upright correctly, it's going to stay upright. But with a chalk hill figure, if you don't keep recutting it, it's going to grass over pretty soon. And yet the Uffington White Horse is 3,000 years old, so people kept it going. I mean, and today, the National Trust, the organisation that cares for it, encourages people to come and join in. And people do come, local people, but also people from far away. And I guess what it teaches us is to be part of a community, to work alongside each other for something that isn't about personal gain, and also to take the long view, to think about what are these monuments going to survive for our children and our grandchildren? And I really hope that they do.
Hmm. Even though this passing down of site care has helped save standing stone sites, there are just as many people who have destroyed them, like we talked about earlier, where they've taken them down and built town walls and different things. So
Yeah.
I'm kind of thinking about this darkness and light that the stones so often represent and this tug between the two. Do we as humans represent the darkness and the light?
Yes, I think we do. I mean, we certainly have darkness and light within us, and how one species can be so creative and compassionate and loving, and on the other hand, so destructive and hateful, always amazes me. And I can't really get my head around what we as a species are.
Yeah, I have that same feeling. Throughout the book, you also share that many of Britain's standing stone sites have been reconstructed over time. And in some instances, there's really no way to know if the stones have been placed in the ways originally intended. And several sites have been destroyed completely, forever lost to time. In my context as an American, I'm thinking about the prehistoric native sites in the US that were destroyed by settlers for farming and construction of new communities, and sites that might be out there that we don't know, right? They're uncovered. What can we as Americans learn from the Brits?
Well, I mean, even though even though there's been an interest in ancient sites for a good sort of 200 or 300 years now, um, the sites are not really safe, and there's a constant tension between the needs of modern society in terms of roads, building houses, and then the need to preserve and investigate the past. And I would say having respect for the past is an essential aspect of modern society. But there's many who disagree with me and who sort of don't really see the value of it. So I think, talking about these places, encouraging people to respectfully interact with them is an important part of preserving them. Because after all, they're out there in nature. Most of them don't have railings around them, and actually I don't really want railings to be put around them because being able to touch them is so important. These sites are for everyone. So the way to preserve them is to encourage everyone to feel that they've got a stake in them and that they belong to them. And then hopefully people will collaborate in looking after them.
Mm-hmm. Going back to storytelling for a moment and the passing down of ancient stories that represent the passage of time, there are two that stuck out to me. Mother of the Sea story, where you explain it as winter triumphs over summer, then summer over winter, and so it goes, from darkness to light and back again. And the Uffington White Horse that we talked about, and its east-west path tracked by the sun across the sky, serving as a pledge carved out of chalk into the hillside that light will follow darkness. I mean, both of these are really strong stories of hope. How can these ancient stories help us in modern times?
So I find the stories of the stories that we can tell now about the symbolism of ancient sites absolutely breathtaking. I mean, there's a site in Orkney in the very far north of Britain called Maeshowe, where at winter solstice the light falls between the two hills of the neighbouring island of Hoy at sunset. It falls between the two hills. It hits this stone called the Barnhouse Stone, which was obviously deliberately placed there, 750 meters to the southwest of the entrance of the cairn. And then it travels up to the cairn and it goes down the long passageway and lights up the chamber that for the rest of the year is in darkness. And Orkney is a place where, when it's winter, it's really, really dark, 18 hours of darkness at midwinter. So this light beam piercing the darkness and heralding the return of the light, promising that the sun will come back, the warmer days will return, is just so hopeful and powerful, and really makes me actually want to cry when I talk about it. Weirdly, I get really emotional thinking about it. And then my local stone circle is not ancient, it's modern. It was built just 25 years ago to mark the millennium. And yet people still go there to watch sunrise at winter solstice. And so that's the same story being told in a different place and 5 millennia later. So, I find that kind of the hope that we just need to remind ourselves that despite all our technology and science and know-how, we're people, we're human people, we go through seasons of sadness and joy, and in the end we die. It's important to remind ourselves of that.
Mm-hmm. And 1,000 years from now, people may find your local stone circle that was built 25 years ago and be asking these same questions of why the stones were placed the way they were and such, which I find really fascinating. You conclude by writing that, and I'm paraphrasing here, standing stones tell us the past echoes on and that memory is stronger than death. Reminders that the world is always swinging from darkness to light and back again, and that there are seasons in our own lives too. Can we try to make the most of this one crazy, wonderful, heartbreaking, beautiful life? That's poignant and so true. So I'd like to know, where is this new season taking you?
Well, having worked so long in publishing, supporting my authors as their books came out, it's been just so exciting to be on the other side of that, releasing a book of my own. And even though it's been a bit emotionally grueling at times, it's been just wonderful doing all these events, interacting with other Stones enthusiasts and meeting people who've read my book. And then in January of this year, I actually left this publishing company that I'd been with for 14 years to set myself up as a freelance writer and editor. And I've now got various projects on the go, but I'm also hatching plans for another book. In fact, 2 other books. I'd like to write some fiction and also another non-fiction book, but it's all very TBC at the moment. But yeah, I've definitely got plans in that regard. But the thing is, however well this book does, it's not going to bring my husband back, and it's not going to allow me to escape the feelings of sadness. And I still have to go through all of that and try and help my kids get through it. So I guess I'm realizing that there are no escapes in life, and it's about taking one step after another as bravely as you can.
Fiona Robertson, author of Stonelands, A Journey of Darkness and Light Through Britain's Ancient Places. Thank you for joining me on the Facing Project.
Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to talk with you.
Stonelands, A Journey of Darkness and Light Through Britain's Ancient Places is in pre-sale and will be released on December 2nd, 2025, everywhere books are borrowed and sold. And while I'm a fan of audiobooks and have no judgment of folks listening versus reading, I think the print version of this book is stunning, not only by the words on the page, but also by Philip Harris's charcoal-like illustrations of stone sites that one cannot see on audio. More about Fiona Robertson and her work can be found on Instagram at Stonelands with an underscore between stone and lands. Thank you again to Fiona Robertson for joining me on today's show, and to her publisher Pegasus Books for providing a complimentary copy of Stonelands, A Journey of Darkness and Light Through Britain's Ancient Places. To listen to past episodes of this program, visit indianapublicradio.org/The Facing Project, or find us on your favorite podcasting app, or on YouTube, or on the NPR network, or just ask your smart speaker to play The Facing Project on NPR. To continue the conversation about this episode, find us on Facebook and Instagram at Facing Project. The Facing Project is recorded at Indiana Public Radio at Ball State University in beautiful and wonderful and evergreen Muncie, Indiana. And it's produced by the amazing producer and audio engineer extraordinaire, Sean Ashcraft. The show is distributed nationally through PRX. I'm your host, J.R. Jamison. And until next time, I wish you the courage to share your own story and the empathy to listen to others.